Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Risk Matrix with myself, Dr. Logan Martin, and my friend here, James Junkin. Hey, James.
Hey, roll tide, roll tide. It's so good to be here with you, Dr. Martin. I'm really excited about this episode. Real excited about moving from winter to spring. I know you're not. You're still under the,
We're
the
still getting
snow
snow.
blizzards, but it's 84 degrees here. I had shorts on today. Roll tide,
Nice,
baby. Don't be
nice.
jealous. Hater gonna hate.
Haters gonna hate. I guess so, but it's still snowing here. It is what it is, right? So, thank you, Veriforce, for giving us this platform to talk to both our listeners, Veriforce customers, people who are interested in making their workplaces uh, a little bit less riskier and a lot safer. So we're powered by Veriforce, and thank you for that. We don't have a guest today, but James, I think what we're going to do is we're going to go right to the rip from the headlines.
Absolutely. H2S is in the news. Just here in the last month, not only has the Chemical Safety Board released its investigative findings related to the Deer Park, Texas Pemex Refinery H2S release, tragedy has struck across the country related to H2S exposures. This morning, as I was looking through some of the headlines, February 19th, Clyde Township, Michigan. Now, normally when we think of H2S exposures, we think of H2S exposures in the workplace. However, these
Mhm.
two young men that passed away were doing a well cleaning job in St. Clair County in Michigan. So evidently, they were beneath a home doing some type of cleaning in a well, and they were used muriatic acid to clean the well, and that acid reacted with some of the iron scale that was in
Mhm.
the well itself to form H2S gas. It off gassed and it killed these two young men very tragically. And you and I were talking about this before we came on air about how that can occur, and I've seen it occur in the oil and gas industry when iron sulfide scale will build up in the wellbore when we're doing acidizing operations. But this is the first time I've ever heard of this happening outside of that type of scenario. So
Well,
really shocked to see that.
you must not clean the bathrooms in your home, James. Maybe somebody else does. But one of the common things that people use in their household are the acidic cleaners. Muriatic acid is one of the things that plumbers use
Okay.
to unblock pipes and whatnot. But a lot of cleaning personnel, they have a lot of stuff on their carts that to clean commercial places, etc. I've even heard of people using stuff in their bathroom, heavy duty chemicals to clean their own bathroom. And a lot of these things don't mix, right? And as you said, muriatic acid doesn't mix well with iron sulfide. There's a reason for that, right? It descales iron pipe. It
Mm.
does so in your home as well, but you have to be careful, right? There has to be a place for that chemical to go. You shouldn't be in the space, especially if it's confined next to it. Rust removers, lime cleaners, any of those things that you see off the shelf that are ORMD, things you can buy in Home Depot or your local grocery store. All these things have the same type of chemicals that you're using in large quantities as you indicated in the drilling industry.
I mean, this actually could have been a lot worse. 3 other workers were overcome with the gas. 2 deputies wanted to rush in and try to help, but they could smell the gas when they exited their vehicle, and they didn't have the right PPE, and they had the proper training, so they backed off. The fire department came, but it could have been a lot worse. But it's tragic enough in the results of this, and I think it highlights taking safety home with you, particularly when you're dealing with chemicals, the importance of safety data sheets, the importance of understanding the chemicals you're working for, what the physical hazards are, what the health hazards are, and how to protect yourself.
Yep,
So rip from the
absolutely.
headlines there. Next, rip from the headlines, double whammy related to H2S. OSHA cites 3 companies and proposed $246,000 in fines in the deaths of 6 workers at a dairy farm in Colorado. So it appears what happened in this case, there was a pipe that was being used to manage manure management. And of course, manure, decaying organic material, certainly that can lead to the formation of H2 gas. Some of these workers were contract workers. An employee was trying to stop the flow of the manure water And unfortunately, that water was mixed with H2S gas. They were overcome with it, and a total of 6 employees, 6 workers were killed. OSHA issued almost $250,000 in fines. So when I think of H2S, a lot of times we think about it just in the oil and gas industry or just in the chemical processing industry. Here are two industries that have nothing to do with any of that. And we've got 8 people dead and multiple others overcome by this deadly gas.
Yeah, well, let me just say, we see it in construction too, right? A lot of people that do utility work, that work on big mains, either rehabbing or setting new services, they can also come into contact with H2S through wastewater. So, this is a really good topic. I think one of the things that we can use as a segue to our discussion today is, you mentioned that these workers uh, went into a situation that they weren't familiar with, right? They usually didn't work in that area of the plant that you mentioned, and it brings to mind simultaneous operations, which occur probably on oil and gas sites just like they do in construction, right? It's something you need to account for. People don't really think about. And when I bring it up to clients, and I'm sure you do too, when you bring it up to clients, they say, I never thought about that. So let's talk a little bit about simultaneous operations and briefings and the things that need to go on in order to bring workers up to speed for things that they might not usually encounter.
So I posted a breakdown of this particular incident. The breakdown comes from the U.S. Chemical Safety Board's investigation on the fatal H2S release at Pemex Deer Park Refinery. It was issued just a few weeks ago, February 23rd. Ironically, on the day it was issued, I was in Washington, D.C., speaking at Global Chem for the American Chemistry Council alongside the head of the Chemical Safety Board and had a board member there. And we had a brief discussion about this. And what I found very interesting is if there was ever a good example of James Reason's Swiss cheese model, it was this. It was this. You had Boilermakers, which is a construction trade working in a refinery in Texas. And really, the result of this was the information, life-saving information, didn't make it from the people who had the information to the folks who needed the information.
Right.
Misidentifying a line that was very close to each other, within 5 feet of each other, opening that valve, released H2S, killed 2 workers, would cause the community to have to shelter in place. So your point about simultaneous operations and the increased hazards that involves is well taken. Now, I'm kind of going on here, but there was another aspect to this, and I see it all the time. One of the findings the CSB said was the permit tried to do too much. They had 15 permits, or 15 valves rather, listed under the same permit. And it created an illusion of sameness. But there were sharp contrasts that existed between each of these energy isolation points. And sometimes I think, you get buried inside the documentation. Hey, if it's a high hazard, we need to pull that out. We need to point that out. Communication is so critical and tough in incidents like this. And like you see it all the time.
Yep. Yep. So I was just discussing this the other day with a client that works on big construction sites, right? What does it mean to communicate, right? And the term simultaneous operations came up, SimOps, I think a lot of people call it. And a lot of times we think we're communicating with people, but we're not accounting for the people around us or the people whose workspaces abut ours. Okay. And this is especially important if we're both using a different type of chemical, or somebody's doing confined space and somebody's doing work that needs fresh air. There's just a lot of different things that go on a big site, whether it's an oil and gas refinery, whether it's a construction site, even a big plant. You can find where people are working in one area and something's going on in an adjacent area, and those things conflict. and the communication is poor, right? And SimOps, or having a SimOps policy or procedure of how that communication is going to flow, right? What can and cannot go on simultaneously. What can go on simultaneously, as long as we're all trained in what those procedures are going to entail. These are the types of things that you talk about to prevent some of these incidents.
And that was a huge call out. There was a box. All of us have seen permits. I've been working with a colleague on a lot of permits here lately, and you have multiple things to fill out on a permit. Typically, simultaneous operations as an industry best practice can be found on the permit. In the Deer Park incident over at Pemex at the refinery, they had a box to check for simultaneous operations, but it was treated just as that,
Hmm.
a box check. And no one paused to really think and consider and reckon with the reality that the live acid gas line that they were about to open was upwind of a turnaround zone packed with contractors. In this incident, the workers that killed were not involved in the actual process. They ended up being the recipients downwind, totally unaware of what's going on. So I've seen this multiple times where it just becomes a checkbox, right? And
Hmm.
it and I think it happens when permits are overly broad. You have a lot going on. It's easy to just check the
Pencil whip
box.
it. Pencil whip it, right? I mean, everybody wants to simplify a form, right? I mean, I'm all for simplifying a form, but here's here's the danger in that, right? Simultaneous operations is not a checkbox, right? Just by the nature of the term, right? Simultaneous operations mean more than one operation, and that means calling out exactly what's happening at the work site, at your job, at the point location of the task, and what's going on next to it. And actually, I mean, you can call it a JSA, JHA, whatever, but have a JHA that calls out the SIMOPS hazards. You may have hazards of this and hazards of that, of the two different things or the three or four different things that you're doing, but there are hazards of mixing those hazards together.
Absolutely. And another confounding issue I found in an incident that involved a client we represented several years ago was not properly identifying who was going to be controlling outside of construction. Sometimes that can be confusing. In construction, you have a controlling contractor and then, a general contractor and then contractors and subs, and there's a clear delineation within the chain of command. Well, a contractor had a job to go out there and perform for an oil company and they got behind and they asked my client to come out there and assist. Well, we did it one way as far as a process was concerned. And it was removing fire tubes. You pull a burner stack off a heater treater shack. I know if you're not in oil and gas, I might as well be speaking Chinese, but think of it as a big stovepipe, right? Looking like thing. And the idea was to pull that off and pull out the fire tubes and replace it. Well, my company, the company I represent, we used a crane to do that because we're lifting and we have workers working underneath a suspended load if we don't use a crane to take it and set it down. The other company didn't do it that way. They used some sort of ratchet strap type device, and it was rigged to a 3-inch nipple at the top to lift the pipe up so they could separate it, quickly go in there and put it back. Well, whose plan are we following? Whose processes are we following? Whose procedures are we following? Well, because we did not have a good process in place to discuss that, we have two foremen out there trying to figure it out on their own. And so the foreman for our company, he didn't feel comfortable telling the foreman for the other company because it was their job that he didn't feel like it was safe. So hazards are best controlled in the design and planning of the work. We used their method and dropped a 30-foot pipe onto someone's head. And
Yep.
luckily, thank goodness for hard hats, this worker was not seriously injured, but he had SIF potential all over it. So, SimOps, anytime somebody else is joining the operation or working with other people, that should raise a red flag, in my opinion, to stop and pause. stop and pause and check and make sure we're all on the same page.
I mean, it can be as simple as that, or it can be a little bit more complicated. You know, if that checkbox has to be on the form and it's just a checkbox, that there's a disclaimer that says you have to move to the SimOps policy. I know some of my clients actually have a SimOps form that includes a JHA that coordinates the work between parties, and they also use the change management system. You know, I
You
mean,
know,
if it's not your policy or procedure, if it's not the way you usually do it, but somebody's going to do it a different way, then that's change management.
one of the things they called out inside the CSB's report is the operator of the refinery, when investigated, said that he told the contractor foreman that morning that there were some live lines in that area. It's unclear whether the contractor foreman relayed that to the crew, but the crew said that they were never told of that. So when we're talking about a PSM facility, but I think it applies to all high hazard work, it's always great to go down and walk things down with the crew, putting hands on pipes, putting eyes on valves so that something like this doesn't happen.
Well,
There,
and the
I,
explanation has to be in line with their training, right? If they have no training in what somebody's going to do adjacent or in their work area, they need to know, right? That they have a right to know. And so, you know, leaving out just even not just doing a walkthrough, but actually doing training on, you know, emergency response procedures and actually knowing what to do if something goes wrong. Even if it's just a runaway, right? People need to know what the hazards are. That's
and
the huge takeaway for me.
and the other takeaway I have, I'm gonna quote Todd Conklin. I don't know if he came up with it. A lot of other people have used different variations of this. Work as imagined, work as actual work as performed. That's another takeaway from this Deer Park H2S release. And I think it applies to just about everyday situations. The Pemex had policies, they had procedures, they had steps, they had processes, but not everybody was following. They had really good written rules. It's in a PSM facility where you expect to have the next level for documentation. But some of those rules have become disconnected from the way work was actually carried out. So when we're auditing, that's something I think as an auditor, we go and see, are they doing what they say they're doing, or is work being performed the way that we have planned it to be performed? Right?
Well,
Because if
let
not,
me
you
ask
can
you
get
this,
drift.
James. How many times have you been out auditing something on a job site and it's exactly how it's described in the J?
It's not. It's not. And it's funny, it's interesting you said that because that was one of the takeaways from the Chemical Safety Board that when they interviewed the operators, they acknowledged that they checked the box on simultaneous operations. It was on the permit. But other than it having a box that said SimOps, it had no practical guidance attached to it. So then every shift that comes on interprets it different. So
That's
you end
right.
up with a failure of communication, and failure of communication is 100% a causal factor in that incident that claimed two people's lives.
Yeah. So, you know, one of the things that I advocate for, that was a loaded question, right? Most often when I go to a site, I can look at the JHA and I can look what the guys are doing, the guys and gals, and it's seldom matches 100%, right? And that's not a bad thing. Okay. It's not a bad thing as long as the communication is there on what could happen and what are we going to do about it, right? Hopefully that makes it to the JHA. I think in a lot of field situations, it doesn't make it to the JHA, but it needs to make it from me to you, right? From me to you working on a task together so that when we do need to punt, so to speak, or do something different, that we're all on the same page as to what the hazards may be if we have to change course. And that we know how to stop work, take a pause, do a few minute huddle and decide if we have time to actually drill down a little bit deeper and make things safer as we go forward.
in this incident is a perfect example of what you discussed. It wasn't that neither company didn't have a functioning safety management system, trained workers, compliant documentation. It was small deviations. It was a little bit of drift, right? That happened every day. So the host employer here, the refinery, they had not consistently enforced performance expectations. They had not totally ensured that procedures were definitely followed as written. There were all these small deviations that you had. There was not an audit of the contractors that that was there to catch the drift that was happening early on. And when you're in an outage or your turnaround here in the South, that's what we call it down here, turnarounds up north, outages or some planned maintenance period. When you're working those long hours and the plan is to get the plant back up and running as quickly as possible, at the tail end of those projects, it's my experience that's when shortcuts get taken or
Yeah.
things get missed. We need to rush, get this back done. We got to get the plant back online. Not saying that that was, the situation here or the thought process here, but unspoken pressure is still real pressure. I know in the
That's
back of
right.
my mind we need to get this done, right?
We need to get her done, right? We need to get
So
her
you
done.
just saw a lack of discipline, adherence to processes and the written procedures that we had at every level. And that's really what opened the door to what turned out to be a fatal mistake. Now, training is always a component of that. In full disclosure, I am a member of the ANSI ASSP Z390.1 committee, which is the committee that creates the recommended practices for training programs regarding H2S. Training in this case is important. Standards don't turn wrenches. Training doesn't turn a wrench, but they do shape instincts and behaviors. And one of the things I like about the training programs that we recommended from the ANSI committee, the latest update was in 2024, is this idea of ritual, of process, of hazard recognition, combined with the physical characteristics and the chemical characteristics of H2S, right? So a great training program doesn't just bring you aware that H2S is bad and H2S can kill you. It drives home that just wearing a monitor is not protection. I don't know how many times, Dr. Martin, I hear people talk about, well, we gave them a personal
A
monitor.
personal monitor.
We gave them a 4-gas monitor. I'm like, look, bro, you can be just as dead with your monitor going off. Monitoring is important, but it's not a control. It doesn't stop anything. It's
The best
monitoring.
control, the best control is right here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. A lot of things went wrong that day, but that's where that discipline comes in, that we got processes. We can work around high hazards. We can work around deadly gas if we follow our procedures, our processes, and we're disciplined to that
Yep.
and not just.
So let's jump back a little bit because I want to talk about drift, right? Especially when it comes to SimOps and it comes to uh, policies and procedures, etc. You mentioned we drift a little bit every day, but we also drift as a group too, right? So if I drift doing my task and you drift doing your task, and even though we've talked about what can happen with our tasks, we also need to be communicating about that drift, right? Because within the operations that are going on in a single day, if we're all drifting, right, there's going to be some collision somewhere. And so, again, getting together, discussing the hazards, ensuring that we talk about what happens if I have to X. What does that mean for you, James? Right? And
Absolutely.
how do we communicate that this is happening in my realm and it's going to affect you? Right? So I get the drift from day to day, but I also get the drift of SimOps as work is being done, right? Within our 3 or 4 contractor abutting tasks.
In this particular instance kind of rolls into what you're talking about. They took contractor workers who had been working in another part of the plant in which they had been doing routine blind removals of dead lines to over here where we've got 15 different valves and flanges that we're working on, and 2 of them buried way down the permit are high consequence ones. And that got missed. I mean, to me, when we're looking at the planning of the work, when we have high consequence activities and we're bringing someone in, that's where we stop. That's where we pause. We take that out of this global permit where
And
everything's the
make it its
same
own.
and we make it its own and say, all right, guys, here, we want to make sure we're on the same page. This is different than what you've been doing over here on the other side of the plant. Let's go down there. Let's take a pause
Let's look
because
exactly where they're located.
50 permit are not just items 14 and 15 on the permit. They are really a different change in the work scope that you're performing that day. And that's something we bring up in the training. Bear Force has a really good ANSI Z390.1 compliant program named H2S Clear for energy right now. It's incorporating work practices like that, API, uh, American Petroleum Institute recommended practices. It's incorporating things like the respiratory protection standard. And even though, it's kind of geared toward energy, we've already seen in the rip from the headlines how it applies to plumbers, like you said, to a dairy
Construction.
farm, like you said, in various aspects of construction. 60 workers on average a year will lose their lives to H2S, and many times it's multiple fatalities.
That's right. That's
So
right.
that's kind of my takeaway from this. If you want to check out my article on there, it's over on my LinkedIn page within the articles that I have posted. Again, this is the title of the articles, Lessons in the Sour Wind, What the Deer Park H2S Release Still Has to Teach Us. A lot of comments, shares online about that. If you have even the potential to work with hydrogen sulfide, or you deal with simultaneous operations, or you work in a plant environment, or you work alongside other contractors, I'd check this one out.
And it's a mandatory training under OSHA. It's mandatory, right? So you better look at what you're doing and ensure that it is included in your training program if you work in any of the type of industries that we've mentioned. So that's it,
Absolutely.
James. You want to
Yeah.
take us out for today?
Hey, thank you everyone for joining us. Look, we're getting close to conference season. Conference season's heating up. Safety on the Edge is coming up. I'll be at Safety on the Edge. ASSP's annual PDC conference is coming up. If you've not registered, just as a longtime conference attendee, rooms fill up fast. You're still in probably a discount period. Go ahead and get that down. Make your plan of what you're going to. Every year, you and I, Dr. Martin, give some advice about attending conferences because you can go spend a bunch of money and go to the conference and never get anything out of it other than a nice trip to California. So we'll probably do an episode or something, at least talking about our tips for conference attendance.
I can give plenty of tips, but I like a nice trip to California anytime, and I do like
Hey,
eating good food. So
come on. Let's
come
go.
on.
But hey, thank you very much. Thank you again to Veriforce for powering the Risk Matrix. We appreciate it. But thank you most to our listeners who have made the Risk Matrix podcast a top 15 podcast of all safety podcasts that are out there right now. So we're not in competition with anybody, but it is kind of cool to hear that people are listening to us. Word is spreading. If you want to help support the podcast, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, follow us. We're there on LinkedIn. We're there at Veriforce's YouTube channel. We're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Substack. Hey, you can find the Risk Matrix, baby, and your mama wants you to.
Your mama wants you to listen to the Risk Matrix.
So check us out. Thank you very much for listening today. Hey, that article's over there on LinkedIn. Until next time, y'all keep bringing the workers home safe from high hazard jobs and roll tide, baby.
Roll
Out.
Tide.